My name is James Caldwell, and I'm a nocturnal wildlife biologist. For years, my job has involved studying the habits of animals that wake up when the sun goes down: bats, owls, large moths, and other nocturnal creatures. But nothing I've ever experienced could have prepared me for what I found in the Appalachian Mountain. The idea to conduct a field study in the area came to me out of the blue at an academic conference. I had read a lot about the rich biodiversity of West Virginia, especially in the forests surrounding the small town of Clendenin. Situated on the banks of the Elk River, Clendenin has a population of just over 2,000 and maintains an air of isolation that seems to have stopped in time. Old wooden houses, narrow streets, and little traffic are the norm here. The community is small and close-knit, marked by local stories that circulate in the town square and bar. I arrived late in the October afternoon, under a cloudy sky and a thin mist that was already beginning to spread across the hills. The research station was about 15 kilometers from the city, accessible by a dirt road that wound through dense oak and pine trees. The smell of wet earth and dry leaves kept my car company as I drove along that nearly deserted road. As I parked near the cabin that would serve as my base, silence enveloped me. Not even the usual sound of crickets or the distant murmur of animals was present. That strange silence seemed like a harbinger of something greater. During the first few days, I focused on setting up the data collection equipment, camera traps, motion sensors, and recorders to capture nighttime sounds. Everything seemed to be working, and the initial data showed the usual presence of possums, owls, and bats that are common in the area. However, there was no indication that anything unusual was about to happen. One afternoon, exploring a trail near the stream that ran alongside the station, I came across some tracks that intrigued me. They were much larger than those of a deer, with long, deep claws that marked the damp forest floor. I took photos and marked the spot, intending to analyze them further later. I returned to Clendenin to talk to the locals, hoping to get some explanation. But most avoided the subject, looked away, or said the stories were just meant to scare visitors. Only one man, Mike, the local ranger, agreed to talk. He warned me about the Mothman, a creature he said appeared on the nights before disasters. He said the glowing red eyes described in the legend were a bad omen. The first night I decided to leave the cabin to record sounds. The air was heavy and the silence was absolute. I was in a clearing when a loud, slow beating of wings cut through the sky. I looked up and saw, between the dark branches, two red dots staring at me. For a moment, fear froze my body. That enormous, winged creature disappeared as quickly as it had appeared. Over the next few days, the feeling of being watched grew. Footprints appeared closer and closer to the station, and sounds I couldn't identify echoed through the woods. Then, while rearranging the equipment in the cabin, I found an old journal hidden in a compartment in the table. It was written by a researcher from the 1960s, describing encounters with an entity called the Forest Guardian, with red eyes and giant wings, associated with Cherokee Indian rituals to imprison dark forces in the forest. The next night I awoke to the sound of wings fluttering near my window. Outside, in the shadows, two red eyes glowed fixedly upon me. I knew then that my study had gone beyond science. I was confronted by the Mothman of legend, a creature that stalked the Appalachian Mountains, bringing with it man's oldest fear. The days that followed my first night of encounter with the Mothman were marked by constant uneasiness. Something in those forests seemed to have changed, as if an invisible presence had decided to follow my every step. My mind oscillated between the rationality of science and the inexplicable feeling that I was messing with forces that surpassed human understanding. I decided to return to the site of the footprints, armed with more sophisticated equipment, night vision cameras, heat sensors, and even a small drone to map the area from above. The trail leading to the clearing where I had found them was even quieter, as if the forest were holding its breath. The damp ground held the deep tracks, now partially covered by fallen leaves, but unmistakable in their strangeness. On my way back, I passed through Clendenin again, determined to talk to the locals. I realized that, contrary to what I had expected, the stories were not mere legends meant to scare tourists. In fact, there was a palpable fear, an uncomfortable silence when the subject came up. I went to the municipal library, a small, old building, where I found a collection of newspapers and local reports that mentioned sightings of a winged creature dating back to the 1960s. Among the documents, I noticed an article about the Silver Bridge disaster of 1967, when the bridge unexpectedly collapsed, taking dozens of lives. Some witnesses claimed to have seen a shadowy figure with red eyes flying near the site shortly before the collapse. The connection between the creature and tragedies seemed more than coincidental. Over the next few nights, the feeling of being watched only grew stronger. As I set up cameras in the forest, I could hear the loud, rhythmic beating of wings cutting through the air, a sound that seemed to be synchronized with the rapid beating of my heart. On one of those nights, while reviewing the captured images, I noticed a huge figure, with undefined contours but with eyes glowing red, staring fixedly at the camera. The image was frightening, but the figure disappeared before it could be better identified. I spoke again with Mike, the forest ranger, who confirmed that apparitions always precede bad events. He told me stories that few in town dared to talk about: unexplained disappearances, strange noises on foggy nights, and the feeling that the forest itself was alive and hostile. "It is an entity that does not belong to this world," he said in a low voice, almost a whisper. "The Mothman is an omen. When he appears, it means something is about to happen, something that no one can stop." One night, while installing sensors on a trail, I felt those red eyes watching me from a distance again. The chill down my spine was immediate. I remained calm and, with my camera in hand, tried to focus on that presence that seemed to dance among the trees. The creature seemed larger, more imposing than I could have imagined, with wide wings that moved with a disturbing grace. I returned to the cabin with questions in my mind and little rest. On the table, the old journal I had found days earlier caught my eye again. Leafing through its pages, I realized that the 1960s researcher had attempted to describe what he called the guardian of the forest, a creature that the Cherokee people believed to be a protective spirit but also a warning of the dark forces that lurk in nature. According to the diary, an ancient indigenous ritual sealed the presence of this entity, keeping it imprisoned in the forest. However, as the years passed, the strength of this seal weakened, and the creature began to escape, manifesting itself more frequently. I needed to understand more about this ritual and the legend if I wanted to survive whatever was to come. Ever since I discovered the old journal in the cabin, my obsession with the Mothman story has taken on a dimension that goes beyond any conventional scientific research. The text, written by a researcher in the 1960s, contained details that seem to have come from a world where myth and reality are confused. In it, the man described a Cherokee ritual, a spiritual seal made to trap the entity, the guardian of the forest, deep in the woods. According to the journal, the ritual consisted of a ceremony held in the central clearing of the forest, involving sacred symbols drawn on the ground, ceremonial fire, and chanting in the Cherokee language. This seal kept the creature trapped, preventing it from crossing over into our world fully. But as the decades passed, the power of the ritual had diminished, and the guardian seemed to gain more freedom to manifest itself. I couldn't ignore the possibility that the Mothman was more than just an unknown animal, he was an entity connected to ancient and spiritual forces. This discovery changed everything I believed about nature. That night, I prepared for a new expedition into the forest. I took with me the journal, cameras, sensors, and recording equipment, as well as some items that could be connected to the ritual: incense, a ceremonial knife that I had found in the cabin, and a small box with symbols that I had managed to photograph in the journal. I wanted to try to feel the energy of that place, to understand if something was still alive there, beyond what human eyes could see. As I entered the forest, the atmosphere seemed heavy, as if each tree was a silent witness to ancient secrets. The air was heavy, and the sound of my footsteps was muffled by the thick layer of dry leaves. The sky, although clear at dusk, was already beginning to darken quickly, giving way to shadows dominating the space. I reached the clearing described in the diary. The symbols on the ground, although faded by time, could still be seen beneath the layer of dirt and leaves. I carefully traced the designs again, trying not to break the delicate balance that kept the seal active. I lit the incense and began to mentally recite the words I had managed to translate from the diary, even without knowing their true meaning. Suddenly, a cold, unexpected wind blew across the clearing, causing the ceremonial fire to flicker. A strange feeling washed over me, a mixture of fear and wonder. I was touching something ancient, powerful, and unknown. That same night, phenomena began to occur. The motion sensor went off for no apparent reason, lights flickered inside the cabin, and the sounds of wings flapping loudly outside, as if something enormous were circling the perimeter. The air grew thick, and a sense of urgency overcame me. Later, as I reviewed the footage, I could clearly see the outline of the creature, tall, with an immense wingspan, and red eyes that glowed brightly, like flashlights in the darkness. It was no longer just a shadow, but a real presence, almost human in its posture, but clearly terrifying. The diary spoke of a weakening of the seal and a dangerous approach from what they called the shadow world. I felt like time was running out. From that moment on, I began to hear whispers during the night, indistinct words that seemed to come from the forest. The feeling of being watched became unbearable, and my mind began to doubt whether I would be able to maintain my sanity in the face of that entity. One of the following nights, as I was scanning the perimeter with my flashlight, a piercing red gaze fixed me from a short distance away. There was no doubt about it, the Mothman was there, real and menacing. I understood that the ritual was not just a legend, but a prison, and that something needed to be done to reinforce that seal before it was too late. The days after my last night in the clearing were filled with an oppressive feeling, as if something dark was fast approaching. The old researcher's journal, my notes, and the evidence I had gathered indicated that I was dealing with an ancient curse that linked the Mothman to local tragedy. And to understand it, I needed to know the past of the region, and the people who lived there. I returned to Clendenin, where the air was heavy with silence. Conversations with locals revealed stories not only of sightings of the creature, but also of unexplained losses, accidents, and disappearances that seemed to occur shortly after its appearance. People had lost relatives in mysterious circumstances, others who swore they heard voices and the beating of wings on the darkest nights. The most iconic case, of course, was the Silver Bridge disaster of 1967, an event that has left its mark on the region's history. The bridge, which connected Ohio and West Virginia, collapsed unexpectedly, killing dozens of people. Many residents still recalled stories of a winged figure with red eyes flying over the bridge shortly before it collapsed. The connection between the Mothman and this disaster was something that hung like a shadow over the town. But there was more. Lesser-known accounts told of other, seemingly unexplained, accidents that had occurred over the years in the Appalachian forests. I found reports of disappearances of hunters, small farm residents, and even tourists who ventured into the woods and were never seen again. As I searched, I felt the atmosphere around me change dramatically. The forest seemed to take on a life of its own, trees swayed even without the wind, and the sky darkened on a day that promised sunshine. Animals fled in every direction, and the air grew heavy, charged with an energy that seemed to be building towards something inevitable. I was no longer just observing. I felt like I had become part of that curse, a living element in the ancient plot that the Mothman represented. Amidst these discoveries, an elderly resident known as Eli approached me with a grave expression. "You are toying with forces you do not understand, boy," he said firmly. "The Mothman is not just a monster, he is a warning. A creature trapped between our world and the next, a cursed guardian. When he appears, something bad is about to happen, and there is no escaping it." I talked to Eli for hours, learning about Cherokee spirituality and their beliefs about beings who protect nature but also bring harsh punishments to those who disrespect its boundary. He spoke of a past when native peoples performed rituals to keep these forces in check, and how the loss of these customs weakened the barriers between worlds. Deep down, I sensed that the Mothman was no mere predator, but a harbinger of disaster, an omen, a manifestation of an ancient curse that hung over these hills. As day turned to night, I returned to the cabin. The sky was heavy with dark clouds, and the first rumbles of thunder echoed in the distance. The sense of urgency that gripped me only grew. He knew he had to act, figure out how to reinforce the seal, understand the ancient ritual, and, if possible, stop the curse from coming to fruition tonight. But as I checked my equipment, a shadow crossed the window. For a moment, the red eyes stared at me with an intensity that seemed to pierce my soul. The Mothman was close, very close. The fight for survival and truth was just beginning. Night fell with an almost supernatural intensity, as if the darkness itself was alive and breathing around me. The sky, heavy with clouds, seemed to close in like a cloak, preventing even the moonlight from breaking through the gloom. It was the night of the ritual, the last chance to try to reinforce the ancestral seal and, perhaps, escape the fate that seemed inevitable. I braced myself with the remains of my journal entries, the symbols I had drawn on the ground in the clearing, the incense to purify the air, and the ceremonial knife for the necessary rites. Every step was charged with tension, and every noise in the forest seemed amplified, as if nature were watching, waiting for the outcome of this confrontation. As I reached the clearing, a chilling breeze brushed my skin, and the Mothman's red eyes appeared in the shadows around me. The creature seemed larger, more menacing than ever, its black wings slowly spreading as if in anticipation of the impending storm. I began the ritual, reciting the words I had managed to translate from the journal, my voice shaky but steady. The ceremonial fire crackled, and the incense sent out a thick smoke that seemed to envelop everything around me. The symbols glowed faintly in the firelight, as if they had taken on a life of their own. The creature watched, unmoving, but the tension in the air was palpable. Suddenly, a strong wind blew, extinguishing the fire and scattering the incense. The Mothman's red eyes closed, fixed on me, and a guttural scream echoed through the forest, reverberating in my chest. I felt an intense chill, as if an invisible force was trying to drag me into another dimension, into a world where time and reality did not exist. My body trembled, my mind wavered between fear and determination. It was then that I understood, this ritual was not just a physical barrier, but a spiritual battle. The seal could not be reinforced with symbols and words alone. It was necessary to face the guardian of the forest, to accept its dual nature, both protector and destroyer. With the ceremonial knife in hand, I held it up before the creature and spoke one final invocation, asking that balance be restored. A deep silence fell over the clearing, and for an instant, the Mothman's red eyes seemed to pulse with a strange, almost human light. Then, as if satisfied, the Mothman turned and disappeared into the shadows of the forest, leaving behind a lighter air, a sense that the curse had been contained, at least for now. Upon returning to Clendenin, I felt that something had changed, not only in the forest, but within me. The Mothman would still be there, among the Appalachian Mountains, guarding secrets that few would dare to uncover. I had touched a reality that surpassed human understanding, and this experience would forever mark my view of the world. The legends would live on, and the Mothman would remain an enigma, an omen and a guardian, his red eyes glowing in the darkness, silently watching.